I really do love that song. It's a great song. It gets me all fired up. And talking of fire, you probably would have seen on the news this week the fire that happened in at the Sky City there. I was travelling across the bridge at about 5:30 in the morning, just dark enough that the sun wasn't coming up, and I could see the flames coming off the top of the building from the harbour bridge. It was quite incredible. And so even though I'm talking about fire today, I want you to know that I didn't start that one. That happened on its own. But before the days of health and safety, before the days of forest fire hazards, before the days of little fire starters, one of my favourite things about camping was having a fire. The days when you could build a fire where you were camping. And, as men, we would throw a couple of litres of petrol onto the wet wood, and we would try and get it started that way. We'd have a long stick that would be lighted at the end, and we'd gingerly get close, or we'd try and get a match and light it and flick it into the fire. And you can imagine what happened is there would be a big whoosh, and the fire would leap into life and instantly be warm. That's the only way a fire should be started. You'd have a few singed hairs, but everybody was happy. I love sitting around a campfire, and I love watching the fire and the burning, glowing coals. It seems to mesmerize your mind and seems to just lock your sight in, and you just seem to be able to gaze at it forever. And what we would do around the campfires, because we camp every year, we would tell each other stories of the days gone by. You know, there'd always be someone that is a real good storyteller, and he would make you laugh, and they'd just tell multiple stories all night of what has happened. And then you would often joke and laugh about what happened during the day. You know, what happened on the water or what someone did, and you would just really have a good time. But often as well, you would look towards the future, and you would be thinking about dreams or hopes or things that are going to happen in the future, and you'd talk about them with your friends. You know, cooking marshmallows, one of the favourite things, hot potatoes wrapped in tin foil, and just watching the fire crackle away. Smoke in the eyes, it inevitably happened. Kids wrapped in blankets sitting on your lap, getting close to the fire and it being too hot on your front side and too cold on your backside. Or vice versa, because you never used to seem to get it right. You know, you would jump away as the wood crackled and the wood spit the embers into the air. And we all have some fire stories. Some of them are good and some of them not so good. You can talk to my wife, she will tell you a few fire stories that I created, but we won't go into that today. Today I'm going to talk about fire stories, and I'm going to talk about fishing stories, and they are all linked. Today I'm going to tell you a story of two fires and two sets of burning coals, and Peter the disciple is at both of these stories. We're going to intertwine, denial, splintering of relationships and communities, wild fishing stories, eating, regaining of friendship and love and community. And I guess you could say it's all intertwined like a best-selling novel, or a movie that seems to cover every genre, from love, comedy, drama, nature, and even sci-fi or the miraculous. But what I do really need is I need some disciples. And so firstly, because the story is about Peter, are there any Peters in the room? Have we only got one Peter? Yeah, okay, I know that's you, Peter Harvey, so you're going to have to come up and be a disciple for me. Now, I need some other disciples. The only criteria is that you have to read, and if you need your reading glasses, you can bring that with you. But I need you to be able to read for me, because you don't want to listen to me all day. So I need a couple other men disciples. So if you'd love to be my disciple today, all you have to do is sit in the chair and not fall asleep like the old elders used to do on the rostrum. Yep, so you got the comfy one, Pete, so I don't want you to fall asleep. So I need some other disciples. Ed, you look like a disciple. Can you come be one of my disciples? Yeah. We can have women disciples. But I'm still a couple of seats short. Who would like to come up front and read something for me. It's going to be a very long service if nobody comes. So nominate the person next to you, point to them. Okay, if we have a visitor in the house. Oh yeah, William. Yes, thank you, Ava. Do we have a visitor that would like to come up and be a disciple of Peter? No? That's pretty horrific, isn't it, coming to a new church? Yeah? Oh, we got the drummer, is it? Yeah, okay, let's have the drummer up here. Nothing better than a fire with some beating drums. Okay, so... And we'll just make William read too now, because I don't know whether that seat's going to hold another person. So firstly, Ed, I know it's a long one, but you're a teacher. Are you able to read this in a wonderful storytelling fashion that you would your kids? Sure. And we'll get the mic going in a moment, Fanae.
All right. John 18, verse 15. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest, and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves. And Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, so they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed.
Thanks, Ed. I think we know who can do our children's stories next, or even preach rather than me. But here we have Peter standing round a charcoal fire. And it's burning, and it's warming them. And the other disciple, if you didn't know, is John. He often doesn't use his own name when he's writing. He calls himself the loved one or the other disciple. And so John here has invited Peter into the campfire, into the place where the officers and the slaves and everything was happening with Jesus' denial. And I'm pretty sure that Peter felt pretty cold that night. I think it was one of those nights where he had so many emotions running through his mind. There was fear, there was uncertainty, there was probably adrenaline running from what had previously happened. And he probably also felt a little bit insecure. What am I doing here? Why is this happening? And we know hours just before, Peter had stepped out bravely and he had mustered all his courage up, and he whipped out his sword and he chopped off someone's ear. And that's how he thought he could keep his promise to Jesus. That's how he thought he could help. But it's very interesting that in this story, not so long after he did something very brave, it's not a soldier, it's not a high priest, and it's not a Pharisee, but it's a slave girl that asks him a question. A person of no significance in the surrounding group around the fire. And so he denies it the first time. The officers are standing around listening to as well. And then next he is asked the same question again by another slave, and he denies that as well. And it's interesting that if you read the different accounts in the Gospels, that an hour passes in between the second and the third question. It says it in Luke, I think. And so an hour later, now I'm not sure what they were talking about in the around the fire for the whole hour. I'm sure there was a little bit of awkward silence. But then Peter is asked, are you a follower? Are you a disciple? Do you know Jesus? Have you been spending time with him? Peter could be thinking, what has John Blimmen got me into here? He's invited me in and now I'm in trouble. Why isn't he getting asked questions? Why is it just me? And why do I seem so afraid standing here, ready to deny Jesus? And so it says in the passage, a certain man asked Peter, certainly this man also was with them, for he is a Galilean as well. And Peter replies quite forcibly by what it sounds like, and he says, man, I do not know what you're talking about. And as soon as Peter was speaking, a rooster started crowing. And immediately into Peter's mind, Peter remembers what Jesus had said to him the day before, or earlier even that day. And Jesus has said, before a rooster crows today, you would deny me 3 times. And I'm sure right in that moment that Peter's heart sank. And he questions himself. He despises the words that he just said. And he feels like he has let down Jesus in an incredible way. We're going to read now an account in Luke of what happened, and I think we miss it sometimes. And so my next disciple, Peter, Luke 22:54 to 62, Pete. It's a very similar account, but there is a couple of differences in here that I really think make Peter feel even a little bit worse. So, Peter, could you read about Peter, please?
This is Luke 22:54. Having arrested him, they led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. But Peter was following at a distance. After they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter was sitting among them. And a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the firelight and looking intently at him, said, "This man was with him too." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, another saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." After about an hour had passed, another man began to insist, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean too." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." Immediately, while he was speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had told him, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
Thanks, Peter. Did you see that in the last couple of lines there? Jesus wasn't in a different room, a different house, different part of the complex. It says, immediately while he was speaking, a rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. The Lord had been there the whole time. The Lord had been listening to Peter's first denial and his second denial. And then on the last time, he hears Peter deny, and the rooster crows, and he turns and he looks. You know, I remember as a little boy, in our church, we used to have a stage like this. They used to call it a rostrum, and all the elders would sit up the front. And where I would sit down with my mum. Back then you had to sit with your mum. You had no choice to sit with anywhere in the church you wanted. And you were allowed a friend if you were lucky. But if you played up, you would get in trouble. And I remember not doing something so good, and my father being on the rostrum as an elder, and he gave me that look. I don't know if you've ever had that look from your parents. Yeah. That look was enough for me to stop instantly what I was doing, and hoping that I would not feel the consequences of that look later on. But I can't imagine that was the way Jesus looked at Peter. There was no anger. There was no hate. There was no judgment. Everything I know of Jesus would tell me that it was a look of love. No other look. But I believe it still would have been hard for Peter. As he looked into the eyes of Jesus across the charcoal fire, it would have been hard for Peter not to have felt just like Judas did, like a failure, like a deserter, like a traitor, someone who promises one thing yet does another. And at the most crucial point, he has let down the person that he loves the most. The person who has seen potential in him. The person who has taken time to grow his leadership. The person who has walked miles and miles across this country. They've had miraculous fishing stories together. They've had incredible healings. They've both walked on water. And Peter's been listening to these inspiring talks that he didn't understand fully, but yet wanted to know more. And I'm sure that on those walks there was deep relational talks that Jesus had with Peter. And for 3 years they were together. And Peter at this moment would have felt lost. And now that Jesus was going to be crucified on a cross, he may have thought that he would not get the chance again to say sorry. Peter's charcoal story was not a happy one. Not one that he would want to remember, but it will be one that he will never forget. The smell of the smoke, the burning wood, the warmth on his back, on his front, and the cold on his back, the rooster crowing, and Jesus looking at him in the eyes. I want you to keep this story in the back of your mind as we progress to the next one. I've got 5 stories today. But I want you to put yourself in Peter's shoes. How would it feel to be like Peter in that position? I want you to imagine standing or sitting next to the fire. And I guess my main point is when the mistake seems so big. When the mistake seems so big. And so now I want to tell you about fishing. And if you know me at all, we were raised in Rotorua around the lakes. And so there is some fishing that happens on the lakes, but I think it's a little bit like winning a lottery. You put your rod in and then you hope to get a fish. And so fishing on the sea was very foreign thing to me, and even fishing is foreign because we like to go water skiing and go fast, and going slow and trying to catch a fish seems like a waste of time. And so many years ago, before Jess was born, so that's I think about 21 or 22, I used to work at a company just around the road called Nestle. Fantastic company to work for, especially when the damaged goods came in and you got to take them home. Those scorched almonds were lovely. And the Nestle company had a fishing competition every year held out at Kawakawa Bay. And so my boss, who was the warehouse manager there, wanted to go fishing. And I was the only one that had a boat. But my boat wasn't really a fishing boat. It's called a bayliner, and if you don't know a bayliner, it's more of, they make ski boats as well as fishing boats. But mine was a bow rider. So it meant that it really didn't have a bonnet like a car. And it had seats in the front and you could sit in the front. And so when you're on the lake, you can enjoy the wind and you can laugh at everybody and have a great time. But when it comes to the sea, it's not very good, especially when waves happen. And so anyway, we went out to this competition and I was a novice on the sea. I had life jackets, yes, I was trying to be safe, but I didn't have a flare, I didn't have a radio. Back then, mobile phones were only new, and so they didn't reach out into the sea. And I didn't know where I was going, I didn't have a map. I guess when I look back, it was a little bit stupid, but my boss wanted to go fishing, and I had a boat, and so 4 of us hopped in the boat, and we went out. And it was a beautiful day, and we headed out from Kawakawa, and we went close to Waiheke, a little bit past, and we started fishing. Now, because none of us knew how to fish, we literally caught no fish. And we sat out there for hours and hours, and they'd say, oh, let's go to this next point, but nobody had ever been to the next point before, and so we didn't know if there were any fish there at all. And so we caught nothing, and it was pretty boring in the hot sun. But as we're sitting there, I'm looking towards the land from where we came from, and I can see this wall of cloud heading out towards us. And I can feel the wind picking up a little bit, and I'm just wondering what's going to happen. As that wall gets closer, I can see that it is basically pure rain. And the wind gets stronger and starts blowing, and needless to say, when you're on the sea and the wind blows, all the waves start to get bigger and bigger. And so literally half an hour later, the weather is upon us and it is pouring down. and literally I don't know where I am. And so we pull up anchor and we start heading in. And so I head to where I thought might be Kawakawa Bay. But we hit land, but I didn't recognize it to be Kawakawa Bay. And I thought it was Waiheke Island. And I thought it was the inside of Waiheke Island. And so as we start traveling around, I start to realize that it was the outside of Waiheke Island. And we were going to have to travel all the way around Waiheke Island to try and get to Kawakawa Bay. And as you can imagine, the storm gets bigger, the waves get larger, and we've got no protection because it's an open bow boat, and the water's coming over. And then, I always like to have V8s on my boat, so the fuel is getting low, everybody's getting wet and cold, and I'm starting to worry that we're going to be stuck out in this ocean and not get home. Anyway, we travel for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we work our way all the way around the island. And then the weather clears just enough for me to see Kawakawa Bay, or at least some land, which I thought was New Zealand. And I headed towards it. And then we had to, I think it was like Half Moon Bay or something, and then we had to head out to Kawakawa. By the time we got to Kawakawa Bay, it was a beautiful day again. And so we had no fish, we were soaking wet and cold, and that was the first fishing experience I've really had on the sea, and it was pretty much the last. But I can imagine that in our next story we're going to find out about Peter. So William, you've got a fishing story that Peter is experiencing. So remember, he's just denied Christ, Christ has died, and they've got nothing to do. And so they go back to what they know to do. So William, can you read that for us?
Cool. John 21, verse 1 to 5. After these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. Simon Peter and Thomas called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will also come with you." They went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So Jesus said to them, "Children, you do not have any fish, do you?" They answered him, "No."
And I guess the only thing worse than going fishing is going fishing and not catching any fish. I can imagine that the mood on the boat wasn't exactly ecstatic. I've only been fishing during the day. I can't imagine what it would be fishing like at night. During the day you can see the land. I guess at night you can't. You can look into the water in the day, but at night it'd be pretty dark and cold. The sun can warm you, but at night time it gets a little bit colder. And on a good day it might be paradise sitting out there fishing. But I'm imagining that fishing at night is quite different. Especially if there are clouds that covered the moon, then it's going to be probably dark because it's nighttime. And you might see the odd fire from the shoreline, but it wouldn't be the glow of Auckland or anything like that. And I think it would be pretty lonely and depressing. I wonder what they talked about in their boat. Yeah, are they going to say to Peter, "So Peter, how did the last moment around the fire go with Jesus?" It would be a little bit like talking about the elephant in the room. I would think that it would be a little depressing. You don't catch any fish all night. And so that brings me to my next story in a moment. But it seems whenever I am teaching in a Bible group or facilitating a discussion these days, the answer is always Jesus. No matter what question you put against it, the answer is Jesus. And in this story we find out that the answer is Jesus. So it looks like you got the second reading again, have you, William? Thanks, mate.
Verse 6. And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch." So they cast, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." So when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish.
I guess the opposite of a bad day fishing is a good day fishing. And when your boat is so full of fish, there can be no greater joy for a fisherman, I would think, than having a boat full of fish. And so Jesus comes along and he tells them to fish on the other side, and that in itself is a whole nother sermon. But the miraculous fishing experience happens, and going from no fish to more fish that you can handle leads me into my second fishing story. And so this just happened last year again when I was camping. And like I've said, we like to water ski and stuff and not fish. But there was a guy that came on our camp by the name of Clark. And he has a fishing boat and he loves fishing. And so he convinced me to go fishing with him. Understanding my reluctance for fishing and my experiences before. Now, what you've got to know is that on a lake, if a wave gets to a metre high, you pretty much pack up and go home. You're not going to go water skiing or anything. But a metre swell in a boat out in the sea is nothing. And so he proceeds to tell me that it's going to be okay. We go out fishing in a slight swell. Now, has anyone ever been on the Kaipara Harbour? No? Just me? Okay. It's probably a good reason. So the Kaipara Harbour, you load in at Ruawai, and then it takes you about 3/4 of an hour to get out to the bar. And the bar is where you cross from the harbour into the sea. Now, just to give you an idea, as we're travelling across this bar, and it's been taking us 3/4 of an hour to get there, the first point you come to is called the graveyard. Anyone know why it's called the graveyard? Because that's where all shipwrecks are. Okay, and so he proceeds to tell me, okay, we're just going over the graveyard. Yep, that makes me feel real good. And then he says the next point here, as we carry on further, is called Chicken Point. Why is it called Chicken Point? It's because you chicken out and you go back and drown in the graveyard. Or it gets too rough, and so everybody turns around and goes back. And so he's proceeding to tell me this, that we're going through the graveyard, across Chicken Point, and then we proceed to travel for another hour out into the ocean. And it seems like that we're going halfway to Australia. It was just forever, and we get to a point where we can't see land. And his reasoning is that we need to fish for fish in 650 metres of water. There was a particular fish that he wanted to catch, and it had to be 650 metres down for us to catch it. I don't know if you've ever been on a boat for a couple of hours and you thought that it was a nice, easy thing to do. But when you're in the sea, you literally have to do squats for an hour and a half because you're coming in a wave sitting and you're going like this. So an hour and a half out there, we're doing squats. So I'm already tired. We go out there, and then Clark proceeds to bring out these rods here. And these are some pretty big rods. You can see the size of this, and I'm sure it was pretty expensive. And he's wanting to catch a big blue nose. It's called a blue nose. And so what he does is he gets this fishing rod out, and then he puts roughly about 5 kilos of weight on it. Now, 5 kilos doesn't seem heavy, but when you're dragging it up from 650 metres with a fish on the end, it becomes very heavy. So heavy, in fact, that you know how when you put your rod down and a fish nibbles the bait and you've got to change the bait? Yeah, well, so you've got to pull it up 650 metres, change the bait, and then put it back down. Anyway, I believe it was this rod. The rod got so hot from us pulling it up 650 metres that the handle broke off. It's a really long way. And it actually took us about 10 to 15 minutes to wind it up. It was such hard work, winding up this weight without a fish on. Anyway, Clark knew that this was the case. I didn't, Clark did. And he had a winch from a friend that was very expensive. And this winch had this reel had an electric motor, like a winch. And so you connect it onto the 12-volt battery, and you would just flick a lever, and this little thing would go, and it would just bring it up, and literally in about 5 minutes without any effort. So what does Clark do? He gives that one to me, which is nice. He gives me the best rod in the boat so that I could catch a fish. So we're out there for a couple of hours, and he gives me the best rod, and we're baiting it up. And I'll tell you the answer to that a little bit later. And so we're out there for a few hours, and then we head back into land. And then he says, okay, we're going fishing at the graveyard now. Now, I didn't think that was the best thing to do, but we did it anyway because we only had one fish. And we fished at the graveyard, and then we caught a whole chili bin worth of fish. What I didn't think about is when you catch fish, what do you have to do with it at the end of the day? Gut it and fillet it. And so we got up at 4 a.m, we got the boat ready, we went out, we've been out there all day, we got home, we washed the boat, packed all the fish, and then we get to back at camp at like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and I am shattered because the sun is hot and you've been on the sea all day. And then there's all these people at the camp that are excited to see the fish because they want to eat the fish. And so, we've got to fillet all these fish that we have because everybody was so keen to have it. And when we went out to that 650 metre place, we actually did catch one fish. It was a big blue nose. It was probably that big. I'm not exaggerating. No, I think it was the biggest fish I've ever caught. And what I didn't know was that about halfway up, the fish kind of, it sounds a bit cruel, but he half dies, and then you just pull it up the rest. But we caught a big fish, the biggest fish ever. Why am I telling you this story? Well, Clark was the person that made it possible. They say that the best boat to have is the one that your mate has. Because if you've never owned a boat, you don't realise the amount of cleaning and maintenance and storage and stuff that you have to do to that boat. Then you have to have your GPS maps and your fishing lures and your baits and everything like that so that you can catch this fish. Now, Clark had also gotten some expert help. He'd gotten the president from the local Kaipara Harbour Fishing Club, and so he'd taken us out so we get the best spot. And so Clark had done all the stuff. He even gave me the best rod, made me lunch, drove the boat. I couldn't have been set up to have a better experience that day if Clark hadn't have done it. He really set me up to win. He set me up to succeed. He set me up to get a big fish. So now that brings us to our next story that you could read.
John 21:9-13, 15-17 reads, So when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire already laid in, fish placed on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish which you have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, Come and have breakfast. None of the disciples ventured to question him, Who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and fish likewise. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, follow me.
Can you see some things repeating in these stories? We have 3 denials and a charcoal fire. Now we have 3 do you love me's and a charcoal fire. Here we have the smell, the sound, and the warmth again of the burning coals. And as Peter approached, I guarantee you that he remembered the last fire he was at that Jesus was on the other side of. He remembered what he did the last time he saw those burning coals. As he looks into Jesus' eyes, he remembers those eyes that looked at him. That moment seemed so very long ago, but yet seemed like yesterday. And now Jesus asks him 3 things. And he also gives Peter one mission with 3 parts in it. 3 times Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? Do you notice what Jesus didn't say? He didn't say, "You're fired." He didn't say, "You need to ask for forgiveness." He didn't say, "What you have done now requires you to give up your position in this group." He didn't say, "You're just a fisherman. I need to give this job to someone who is ordained to do it." He didn't say, "Because you don't act exactly the way the religious system requires, you are no longer valued or needed." He didn't say, "Because you denied me, my Father, and my Spirit, you now have to pay the price." What did Jesus say? "I want to bring you back into relationship with me." 3 times Jesus asks him and prompts him to come closer. I think Jesus could have said it this way: "Do you love me with all your heart? Do you love me with all your mind? Do you love me with all your soul?" How can we learn from your mistake? How can this terrible experience we have had over the charcoal fire motivate you to share the gospel of love to others? Hearing John 21 is like reading Isaiah 58, to restore them and to reconcile. And now we've got our last one, Ava. If you could read that, thanks.
When the mistake seems so big, when nothing seems to be working, Jesus still wants to work with you and for you. Jesus invites you back into the relationship. Jesus gives you the mission and purpose of loving others.
And how does he do that? There's a couple of verses right at the end.
John 21:15. Tend my lambs. John 21:16. Shepherd my sheep. John 21:17. Tend my sheep. John 21:19. Follow me.
Yeah. Jesus wants to bring Peter back into relationship, and now he has given him the mission, the purpose of what he wants him to do. Peter's awakening with the second fire, the second set of coals. Peter is given a mission. And in Jesus' eyes, there is no relationship that cannot be restored with him. Please leave nothing behind. Grab all the experience you've had, bundle them up, and bring them to Jesus. Let him change those stories that you have of those experiences, and let him take them from a denial situation and change them into a feast of fish and bread. Let him create a new fire experience for you. Let him change your fishing experience into the one of abundance, not of desolation. Let him take you out of shame and guilt and resentment into a story of plentiful joy. How do you find joy? Come into relationship with Jesus. Bring everything, leave nothing behind. Use what has happened to you in your life to share your story of God's love. I truly believe that if Judas hadn't have decided that he was unable to be welcomed into Jesus' arms again, if he had decided to hang with his community, to be surrounded by Jesus' kingdom, his lads, his mates, and go fishing that day, if he had been prepared to sit at that fire with Jesus, his story could have been so different now than the one that is told. It's not about whether or not you are good or bad. It's about whether you are willing to sit at the feet of the tree of life and eat the bread and the fish that he is providing. To hear his welcoming voice of love, asking us to join community again, to listen to his advice, to hear his motivational talks, to arise to the tasks that he asks us. Tend my lambs, shepherd my sheep, tend my sheep. This is how we love him. When you are asked, do you love me? We can say, yes, Lord. I tended your lambs. I fed those who are hungry. I clothed those who are naked. I raised my children the best way I knew how. I learned, I took advice, tried not to repeat my failures, giving them the best care I could possibly give. I was encouraging to people as I could be, and I told them how much you love them. I tended your lambs. I shepherded my sheep. I lived by my actions, loving my neighbour. I visited those who were sick. I gave hope to those who had no hope. I lead a life group so we can surround people with your kingdom. I taught and listened, leading as well as I could people into your green pastures. I learned through trial and error, through evaluation and constructive criticism. I honed the gift that you allowed me to have. I shared the gospel of salvation, of love and inclusion. I tried to shepherd your sheep, my God. I tended my sheep. As my parents grow old, I take care of them. I check the oil and water in my mother-in-law's car. Family sits and talks together, laughing and enjoys each other's company, to remove loneliness to those who are old and wise. As my theology progresses into new understanding, I am still careful to respect and love others who think a different way. Lord, I tried to tend your sheep, my Lord. Jesus gives you the mission and the purpose of loving others. We're going to sing a song soon, and I'm going to ask the worship crew to come up. And I want you to think about your first charcoal experience. And I want you to see how God can change your charcoal experience into a second charcoal experience. How can He use the trauma or the story that has happened that has been unhappy for something that can be shared, for something that is good, for something that can change people's lives? Jesus can give you the Isaiah 58 mission and the purpose you can share with others, to reconcile and to restore. You know, the last part of a sermon is the most difficult. You want to have the most impacting, wise, memorable words to encourage, motivate, and inspire the audience you are talking to. But I struggle with this. So maybe today I will leave the story open and place the ball in your hands. What experience in your past are you going to allow Jesus to use to grow you? What charcoal, fire, fishing trauma do you have that you can bring to the tree of life to sit at His feet and allow Him to look at you with love and to inspire you to share your story with others, and so they can see who this God of love is that we believe in? Leave nothing behind. Bring it all with you. Allow Jesus to use it. Find new joy at the burning coals. Dear Lord, we just thank you for your love. We just thank you for your grace. We thank you that it doesn't matter what we've done in the past. You just want to keep building relationship with us. May your Spirit come upon the hearts here today and to give peace to those that have been in a charcoal fire situation. And may you grow them so that they can share their story of love that you've given to all of us. Amen.